Hello and welcome back to another segment of World Princess Week. I am your lovely host, Miss Disney, and I shouldn't say today because I did promise some 2 princesses a day at the best ability that I can. In this video, we are going to be reading about Pocahontas and how she shows courage and kindness. Now remember, I will be asking you a question at the end of my story, so please make sure you leave your answers on the comment below. And if you like what you see, click like, click subscribe, and be on your merry way and enjoy the rest of everything else. So let's dive into the... let me rephrase that. Let's go just around the river bend and see about Pocahontas. Pocahontas is part of the Powhatan tribe and daughter of the chief. She is a noble, free-spirited, and highly spiritual young woman, lovingly nicknamed Little Mischief by her father. She expresses wisdom beyond her years and offers kindness and guidance to those around her. She loves her homeland, adventure, and nature. In this story, we're going to be reading Three Sisters, written by Elizabeth Rutnick and illustrated by Alice X. Zhang and Studio Iboix. And it's a special thanks to cultural consultant Dawn Jackson. Isn't she pretty? The air was crisp and cool as Pocahontas walked through the woods. Beneath her feet, leaves the color of a warm fire crunched and made the air sing. Pocahontas smiled. Fall had arrived. It was Pocahontas' favorite time of year. Change was everywhere, and with that change came the promise of new adventures. "Isn't it just beautiful, Meeko?" she said, turning to look at the gray and black raccoon scampering by her side. The little creature looked up and chattered in answer. She laughed. Meeko didn't love fall, or the winter that would follow. To him, it meant cold nights, short days, and less food. But Pocahontas wasn't worried. She and her people had been working and living on this land for generations. They knew the best way to make it through the hard winter. Pushing past some low branches, Pocahontas entered the outskirts of her village. It was busy. Most of the men were off hunting or fishing in order to stock up for the coming months. A few of the younger men had stayed behind to protect the village. Nodding at one of them now, Pocahontas called out a greeting. The young man tried to keep his face serious, but as Pocahontas passed, he broke out in a wide smile. Moving farther into the village, Pocahontas and Meeko arrived in front of what would be a new Yehaken. The frame of the longhouse was starting to take shape. Conversations flowed between the friends, sisters, mothers, and daughters as they completed the various tasks that were required to build the longhouse. It was the job of the women of her tribe to build the homes, and they took great pride in their work. Pocahontas watched for a moment. She had built many homes with these same women, but it still amazed her. Building a home from the nature around them was a part of their tradition and culture. And over the years, the process did not change. Some women worked the saplings, bending them until they created a U shape. Others were sewing the mats that would eventually become the roof. Still, others were collecting wood that would be used to fuel the fire and keep the home warm through the long winter. And still, others worked with furs to create warm blankets that would end up on the floor or low benches that lined the Yehaken. Excuse me. Spotting her friend Nakoma struggling with a long sapling branch, Pocahontas rushed over to help. "Here," she said, pushing down on the branch. The wood bent beneath the pressure of their hands until both ends touched the ground. A half a dozen more had already been shaped and placed in the ground. Eventually, they would form a long, low building that looked like the tunnels gophers created underground. Thanks, Pocahontas, Nakoma said, standing up and brushing a strand of dark hair from her face. I was having trouble with that one. The wood might not be ready, but we don't have time to wait. The family must move in soon. Behind them, the sun was already dipping toward the horizon, making the air chilly. Pocahontas nodded. She knew that the young couple who had recently married would want to move into their new home before the first frost, so it was up to all of them to get the house ready. Fast. I'll come back to help soon, she said to Nakoma. I just need to go check on my crops. Nakoma smiled. Of course, she said. We will be here, and we will have need of your 3 sisters, she added, referring to the corn, beans, and squash that Pocahontas had planted in the spring. Nakoma raised her eyes to the cloudless, sunny sky. I have a feeling it will be a long winter this year. Pocahontas followed her friend's gaze. In the air above, a flock of geese flew south, the V-shaped flight pattern and trumpeting calls heralding the cooler weather to come. It was hard to imagine a time when the same sky would be steel gray and the ground covered in snow. But the season's changes were as inevitable as the geese's migration. Saying another farewell, Pocahontas moved beyond the last of the village's houses to where plots of land had been dug up and planted. Kneeling down, Pocahontas felt the warm dirt on her knees and took a deep breath. The 3 sisters were thriving and almost ready to be harvested. She eyed the bright colors of her garden, the green shades of the corn and beans, the orange and yellow hues of the squash. The colors burst alive and vibrant from the promise of the sustenance they would provide. Kneeling down, she ran her fingers along a smooth stalk of corn, trailing them through the silky threads at the top of the cob, before squeezing a plump bean. Pocahontas smiled, pleased with her work. Hearing voices, Pocahontas rose to her feet and turned. A village guard was approaching. Behind him were 3 Englishwomen. Pocahontas brightened when she saw that one of them was her friend Purity Williams. Purity's eyes were bright with excitement as she looked around. The other 2 young women did not look as pleased. These were Purity's sisters, Patience and Prudence. While Purity's energy glimmered like the autumn leaves in the sun, Patience and Prudence's demeanors were dull and lifeless. Clearly, they were not happy to be here. Purity, Pocahontas said, eagerly walking over. When she saw the worry on the young guard's face, she gave him a reassuring smile. She did not blame him for his concern. It had not been all that long ago that the English had arrived, and tensions had arisen between the 2 groups. But under Pocahontas' urging and example, her tribe had made peace with the English. With a few had returned to England, those who stayed had remained amicable and respectful of the peace forged by Pocahontas along with her father, Chief Powhatan, and the Englishman John Smith. Still, the guard was young, and it was not surprising he would feel a twinge of fear at the arrival of English in the village. Everyone was still learning this new way of life. Don't worry, these ladies are my friends. They are not a threat. Nodding, the young man stepped back and slipped away. Hello, Pocahontas, Purity said, walking up to her. Pocahontas returned the young woman's warm smile. She and Purity had only just become friends, but Pocahontas found the bright and lively young woman to be great company. She had visited her in the English village several times, But this was the first time Purity had come to her. I was hoping you might show us your village, she said now. My sisters were so excited when I mentioned we might come. She looked over at Prudence and Patience. The girls didn't say anything. Patience simply shrugged, and Prudence frown only deepened. Pocahontas bit back a smile. She was quite sure that Purity's sisters had no desire to come, but Purity was persuasive when she wanted to be. She should have been named Perseverance. Of course, Pocahontas said. I would be happy to show you all around. Wonderful, Purity said, clasping her hands together in glee. She pointed to the plants growing in front of them. Are you harvesting this food? Now? Pocahontas nodded. I will shortly, she replied. We plant these in the spring and then wait until the first frost before we harvest the crops. That allows them to grow longer. One by one, she showed the three sisters her own three sisters, the corn, beans, and squash. It is important that we plant these three crops with one another. Alone, they would do okay, but they are stronger and grow better when planted together. These will keep us fed through the winter. To her surprise, Patience let out a laugh, but it was a kind laugh. You do the planting? She asked. Why? Yes, why? Added Prudence, her heavy brows drawing even closer together. Pocahontas was silent for a moment. She understood that the English women led very different lives than her people did. Taking a breath, Pocahontas explained, It is the women's job in our village to harvest the crops. We must make sure that we have enough food for everyone, not just our own family, when winter arrives. The more food we grow, the more we harvest, the better we will eat. But you do all that work? Prudence said. Come on, Quinn. That is just the silliest thing I've ever heard. Don't the men go out to gather food come winter? That is what our men do when we need food or provisions. It is, after all, the job of the men to provide food for us, not the other way around. Then we prepare it. Prudence, Purity said in a harsh tone, not every culture is the same. Turning to her friend, she shrugged. Pardon my sister, she does not always think before she speaks. I think it is wonderful that you have such an important job. A loud shout from back in the village startled the group. Prudence and Patience took a step back, a flash of fear crossing their faces. But Pocahontas was not concerned, just curious. Moving past the two women, she headed toward the sound. I'm so sorry, Purity said in a whisper, falling into step beside her. Behind them, Prudence and Patience reluctantly followed. I thought this would be fun for my sisters. They just sit about the house all day complaining. I thought a walk might do them some good. Don't be sorry, Pocahontas said, reaching over and giving her friend's arm a squeeze. I'm glad to see a friend. Is all well with you? A flash of sadness crossed over her friend's usually cheerful face. It is fine, she said, still whispering. I just worry that we are not ready for the winter ahead. Not like you are. The young woman had reason to worry. Pocahontas had seen the English settlement, and it was still a long way from ready for winter. But she did not say that aloud. She knew it would only make Purity worry more. Instead, Pocahontas slowed her pace so that the sisters could catch up with them. They were holding the long skirts of their dresses as they daintily tiptoed their way over the ground. Do you not have stones or a path to walk on? Prudence whined. Quite right, Patience added in her own whiny voice. Purity leaned in to whisper to Pocahontas. We don't have nice footpaths either. My sisters still think this new land should look like a bustling English city. And what is that smell? Patience crinkled her nose. It smells like wet wood. It is, Pocahontas replied. We have collected wood to dry out. Wet wood does not burn as well. and we'll make our home smoky. So we dry the wood now so that it will be ready to use when the days grow colder. Prudence shivered. Colder? She repeated. It feels quite chilly already. I should have worn my shawl, but Purity was in such a rush I left it at home. I'm practically freezing. I'm sorry to hear that, Pocahontas said. Spotting a fur blanket lying on a low bench outside one of the homes, she offered it to Prudence. The young woman recoiled as if the fur might suddenly become the living animal it had once belonged to. I would rather shiver, she said. Pocahontas shrugged. She had tried. Continuing, they finally arrived at the source of the shout. It was the work site of the new home. Purity's eyes lit up when she saw the structure. Oh my, she said. Look at that. It's like a skeleton of a house. Pocahontas let out a laugh. Yes, she said. It is not nearly done, but we are working hard. You? Patience said. Don't tell me you build homes as well as harvest your own crops. She shook her head. You certainly are a strange group. Pocahontas cocked her head. Strange? She repeated. This is not strange. This is our tradition. We build our homes. Why would we not? We own them, after all. To her shock, both Patience and Prudence looked horrified. What do you mean you own them? Surely you mean your husbands own them, Patience said, speaking for both her and Prudence. Purity shot her sister a look before turning back to the work site. I think this is remarkable, she said. We are given no say in our homes, except in how to decorate them. And what is that over there? She asked, pointing to a round hole in the middle of the structure. That will be the fire pit, Pocahontas explained. For the wood we collect, there will be sleeping mats nearby, and we can cook over the fire as well. We dry some of the meat the men have hunted during the summer months and added it to our vegetables. Some of it we smoke to eat on its own. She remembered what Prudence had said about their men hunting. It is hard to find animals in the winter. Like us, they hunker down to stay warm. Some even sleep the entire winter. Though we don't have that luxury. Pocahontas said the last part with a smile, hoping to bring one of the faces of Prudence and Patience. But Prudence just scowled. Well, I think we've seen enough, Purity, she said. I would like to return home, where we do things a woman should do. Not play at house building and harvesting. Turning on her heel, she started off, but her steps were slowed by her long dress, and she ended up waddling more than storming off. Patience walked off after her. With an apologetic glance at Pocahontas, Purity turned to follow her sisters. Thank you, she said over her shoulder. I loved seeing all this. I hope I could come again soon, perhaps alone next time. And with a small smile, she too left. Watching them go, Pocahontas frowned. She knew that this was a new world for the English women. She just wished they would be a bit more open to the differences. A few weeks later, Pocahontas stood in front of the completed longhouse. She smiled as she saw the women of the village gathered around, helping the new couple fill the home with furs and mats. It had been hard work, but they had finished the home and gathered the crops just in time, it would seem. Looking up, she saw the clouds were heavy and gray. A storm was coming. As if sensing her thought, a single flake of snow drifted down from the sky. A moment later, another fell, and then another, and another. Almost instantly, the sky was filled with white. This wasn't just a storm. This was the worst kind of storm, an early winter squall. Anyone caught outside or unaware would be in danger of frostbite or worse. Following others, Pocahontas made her way into her own longhouse. Settling in beside the warm fire, Pocahontas listened as her father and several other elders of the tribe spoke of what the early storm could mean. She heard English, sign, and danger, among other things, and let out a sad sigh. She had hoped that this winter would be an easy one for all of them. Adjusting to the arrival of the English was difficult enough. Adding a long season of storms might only serve to heighten any underlying tensions. The storm raged outside, but inside her longhouse, Pocahontas felt safe and warm. They were prepared, even for this early storm, and while she knew it would mean more work when the storm was over, Pocahontas secretly liked the weather. It brought people together, and despite the dangers outside, Pocahontas heard the warm rumble of good conversation from inside the longhouse and from the longhouses all around. She was just settling into work on a mat as a gift for the new family when the flap of her own home burst inward, bringing with it a scattering of snow. One of the young men from her tribe stood in the entry, his dark hair covered in white. There was a shape behind him, and as he stepped farther inside, the shape took form, revealing Purity. Pocahontas leapt to her feet and rushed to her friend. Purity was shivering beneath a cloak, her fair cheeks with cold. "Pocahontas," she cried, "you must help us. The roof on our house wasn't ready for the storm. It completely collapsed, and my family is freezing." She nodded over her shoulder. "They are here with me, if that is okay." "I just need to ask my father," Pocahontas said. Turning, she made her way to where her father sat. His face was stern, as if he already knew the question she was going to ask. She quickly told him what had happened. For a moment, Chief Powhatan hesitated. Pocahontas held her breath. She knew she was asking a lot. To share their food and fire would drain their own resources. But her father had taught her to value right and wrong. Finally, he nodded. Giving her father a quick hug, Pocahontas turned back and made her way to Purity. "Your family is welcome in our home until the storm passes," she said. "Oh, thank you, Pocahontas," Purity said, grabbing her hands and squeezing them tightly. "Thank you." After ducking back outside, she returned a moment later with Patience, Prudence, and an older couple who, based on the dour expressions, looked like Patience and Prudence. Must have been their parents. "Welcome," Pocahontas said. "Please, warm yourself by the fire, and I will get you some food. You must be hungry." Patience, the ever-present scowl on her face, nodded. "We will not trouble you for long. We can see how cramped you are already." She gestured at the various villagers who had gathered in the longhouse of the chief. "Patience, enough," Purity said with her expression stern. "You will be grateful for the hospitality Pocahontas and her family are showing us. Now sit down and be quiet." Pocahontas smiled proudly. Purity was a force stronger than any storm. She watched as her friend's family slowly made their way inside and closer to the fire. At first, the villagers were quiet, waiting to see what would happen next. But as the minutes ticked by, the longhouse grew warmer, both in temperature and mood. Sitting beside Purity, Pocahontas laughed as several of the younger children of the village tried to play with Patience and Prudence. "I don't think they realize my sisters have never had fun, even when they were kids themselves," Purity whispered. "Just watch," Pocahontas whispered back. "I bet they will have them playing along soon enough." As the storm continued to blow outside, Pocahontas and several of the other women brought out food from their stores. They passed it along, and because of the good harvest, no one went without. "This is delicious," Purity's mother exclaimed after her first bite of the stewed corn and squash. "We must be sure to get the recipe from you, Pocahontas." I do not believe we have recipes like you are used to, Mistress Williams, Pocahontas said kindly, but I would be happy to show you how we make it sometime, if you would like. Please, Mistress Williams said, you are welcome in our home at any time. After all, you have so graciously opened yours. Nodding, Pocahontas turned to her own plate, but feeling eyes on her, she looked up. Prudence and Patience were standing in front of her. To her surprise, they both looked rather sheepish. We just wanted to say, Prudence started, that we're sorry for how rude we were, Patience added. The other week, Prudence finished. We were wrong to judge you. Purity was right. You are strong and have so much knowledge about this place. We don't understand it all. Not yet. She paused and listened as the wind howled outside. I wonder if, I think what she means to say, Purity said, joining her sisters, is that perhaps you might be so kind as to teach us a bit. For next winter, that is. How to grow crops, maybe? She looked at the plates of food, full despite the storm raging outside. Prudence nodded. A small smile formed on her face. It made Prudence look years younger, and Pocahontas finally saw a bit of family resemblance to Purity. Yes, perhaps come spring, you might be willing to show us how to plant as well. What did you call them? 3 sisters, Pocahontas answered. Yes, of course. And until then, we will share our food and our fire. She paused and looked around the longhouse, full of people so different but brought together by the same needs. Change had certainly come to their village with the shift of the season, but it was a change for good. Like the 3 sisters, Pocahontas added, we are and always will be stronger when we grow together. Wow, now that is a natural act of kindness right there. And as we know, Pocahontas is bold, a protector, daring, respectful of nature as it was shown, generous and spiritual. Her dream is to have the courage to walk in another's footsteps. Her heroic moment, a cry for peace to stop a war between settlers and her village, her tribe. And her sidekicks, of course, included Miko and Flit. And her famous quote, my dream is pointing me down another path. So here is my question for you. What can you teach others?